Rock, and I am on the farming and production side.
Adam Lee.
Hey everyone, I'm Adam Lee. I have been working with grapes in the Santa Lucia Highlands since 1997. I used to own a winery called Siduri Wines, which I sold to Jackson Family Wines about 9 years ago. I now have Clarice Wine Company, where I get fruit from the Gary's and Rosella's vineyards, and I'm also the consulting winemaker for Rombauer Wines on their Pinot Noir, which means I get fruit throughout the Santa Lucia Highlands, kind of from the northern end down to the southern end.
And Steve.
Thank you, Gwen. It's Steve McIntyre with McIntyre Vineyards, and we've been in the Santa Lucia Highlands now since 1987. We purchased the vineyard. We're currently farming our own vineyard, our state vineyard, La Playa Vineyard, which is next door, and looking forward to the discussion today. And it's great to be kicking off harvest this early compared to last year.
Wonderful. It's great to have all of you. Thank you, everyone, for joining. I want to start with just a little grounder. Let's remind ourselves where we are. We have some new people joining us. I know that. So let's start with where we are. We've got this great little fly-in, Google Earth. Just remind us, where is the Santa Lucia Highlands? Smack dab here, just south of the Monterey Bay. This is a great look for us to really get a bearing of where we are. So you see down there south of the Monterey Bay, that really important influence for the Santa Lucia Highlands creates those strong daily winds that have such an important impact on the grapes, not just how they grow, but the flavor of the wines that you love. So you can see the fly-in here taking a view south from the Monterey Bay. All that really, really cold water creates this ocean effect. If you went past Soledad, you'd see Paso Robles way down the valley. When it heats up down there, that pulls all of that cold, cold wind from the Monterey Bay down through the Santa Lucia Highlands. So this is a great view of the vineyards with the Big Sur coast, the Pacific Ocean in the back. And also gives you just a look at the vineyards from the northern end of the SLH, where the vineyards are sort of sloping up towards the hillside. In the middle, things start to change a little bit as we head southward, and you really start to see these canyons and sort of mesas, these little fingers, the vineyards sitting on the top of a little plateau with an arroyo in between it. And of course, as we travel from north to south in the Santa Lucia Highlands, we gain maybe about 10 degrees of temperature from the north to the south as well. So just a little reminder, there is the Santa Lucia Highlands for you. Wanted to also give a quick update. We have some news from the actual kickoff of harvest. This happened last week. Our friends over at Caraccioli Cellars started with their first pick on August 14th. I'm going to pull up a couple of pictures here. This was beautiful fruit from a Skoll vineyard on August 14th. They took in about 4 rows of Pinot Noir. 2 days later, our friends over at Chandra Grapefield, Joe and Penny Allerid, started picking Chardonnay and a little bit of Pinot Noir as well. So you can see things are just looking beautiful out there. We'll get back to a few more images of harvest. Adam Lee's got some images fresh from this morning. And so now I wanted to really dive in and talk about the season and what's been happening in the vineyards since we last spoke to many of you that joined our last Harvest Zoom, which was at the end of May. So Adam Franchoni, why don't you give us a look and kind of tell us what's been happening since May?
Yeah, it's been busy. So we got about 15 inches of rain this winter and spring, and on average we're about 12 to 14. So anytime we're over our average, we're pretty happy with. We're very low rainfall here in this appellation, but our vines manage it and they do well with it. So we've been able to hedge this year. Canopies are really full. And we had a little bit of a warmer summer, I'd say, than normal. But the past month has just been classic SLH. We've had morning fog and then these winds. Right now, the winds actually started really early today. Like by 8 a.m. they were getting going. So I'd say the last month has been a real nice reprieve from some of the summer months that we had before that, and we're just kind of we started veraison probably last week of July, and so we're just kind of gearing up for what's about to come.
That's great. Adam, Lee, what are you seeing out there since May?
Yeah, it's been really interesting to see the change that's occurred over the last month or so that Adam was talking about, because I get grapes not just from the San Lucia Highlands, but also from up here where I live up in Sonoma County. I would have sworn to you that up until about 3 weeks ago, 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, the Sonoma County was running behind San Lucia Highlands. That San Lucia had had a somewhat warmer summer, and we'd had a couple of big heat spikes up in Sonoma County, but not the like continual warmth that we'd had kind of in the San Lucia. Now things have reversed within a fairly short period, and the San Lucia, as Adam said, has kind of reverted to normal, and it's slowed things down a good bit. And now Sonoma County tends to be moving and charging ahead a bit more. So it's kind of reverting to normal. I've also seen when we were going through, and one of the things last time we didn't quite have yet, we started to, but were cluster counts when we were counting how many clusters were out there. And we were saying that there were fewer clusters than normal a little bit. And that certainly continues to be the case in most places. But we had ideal weather during flowering and set, absolutely fantastic weather during that time period. And that has led to clusters that weigh more. They seem to be a little more tighter. They seem to have a bit more weight to them. And so I think we're not positive until we actually pick some vineyards. I mean, you're never completely sure, but I don't think we're going to be completely positive exactly where the yields are going to be until it comes in. It's really hard sometimes to base when your weight is in the cluster weight, when you just have to count the number of clusters and do some basic math. That's not that hard. If you have a cluster that weighs 80 grams but your average cluster is weighing 90 grams that year, 10 grams doesn't seem much on a one cluster basis, but when you do the math all the way out through the vineyard, that extra 10 grams of weight is a huge amount of extra fruit out there. So I'm not positive that we know exactly how much we're going to have, but until until we get to harvest. Lastly, because the weather was so ideal during veraison, and when things have been coloring up during the flowering set in veraison, there hasn't been a lot of need to thin a lot, quite frankly. So we haven't really needed to put fruit on the ground. A lot of times we have some, but a lot of times what you do is you put fruit that's not coloring up at the same rate as others on the ground, particularly if you had a long flowering season, and we haven't had that. So there's not a huge need to put large amounts of fruit on the ground right now.
Speaking of fruit on the ground, these are some
Yes.
images that you sent us this morning. Let's talk about what we're seeing in some of the things here.
Yeah, so this is some stuff that I took this morning. I was down, I'm doing a little bit of sampling. We do go through, as you can see over on the right there, and put some fruit down. Mainly what we're doing is putting down, as I said, anything that's not colored up, but it's not a large amount. And then also wings. So a cluster will have the main portion and then a smaller portion off to the side of it. Not all clusters have that, but some do. And so we'll work with, obviously, the Franchiones and Pizzoni families, our growers there, and drop off those wings on the side. One of the things we discovered over time is that the clusters that have wings on them are running about a week to 10 days behind the clusters that don't have wings on them. And so you would like to even those out. If all the clusters had wings, we probably wouldn't worry about it. But the fact of the matter is they don't. And so just to try to make sure that everything is even, we'll turn around and put some things down on the ground like we see in the picture on the right there.
See if I can get to the next one here.
So here you can see what I think I mean, it's funny, but I was so excited today after just going to the vineyards. I mean, and walking through, it's like being a kid all over again. You're just delighted by when you see fruit like this, where you get some dappled sunlight in, but it's not fully and completely exposed. You have the clusters. You see that they're hanging free, so there's not a cluster on top of another cluster. I mean, that's where you can have problems with botrytis because of some of the fog and the like, but we don't have any of that this year. The fruit seems to be probably because also you have a fewer number of clusters. They seem to be incredibly well spaced out. I think everything is set for the potential to be an incredible harvest, incredible growing season. We did find a bird's nest. Quite frankly, Mama Bird was not too thrilled as we were walking past there and scared the crap out of us. But we did see a little bird's nest there. But one of the things that we are now looking at as we are going along, I mean, we check numbers, we check sugars, we check acids, you do all of those things. But one of the real important things you check is also browning of seeds. And as you can see, we're not there yet. So we're not ready at this point in time to pick Pinot Noir. You can see the seed is still green. It has a bit of, and I'm sure Steve or Adam, those of you who know viticulture better than I do, it's not really called snot around the seed, but that's what I call it. That's what it looks like. And it is that ends up drying up and going away, and those seeds turn brown. And that's one of the things that we really look for to decide that the clusters are mature, the berries are mature, and that you can go ahead and pick at that time. So we obviously have a little bit of time left still before we get there.
Great, thank you, Adam. And Steve, what about you and your teams? Tell me kind of what you've seen in this this summer so far. We've had variation. We definitely have had a few warm spells. We were down there at our Somme tour with a big group, and boy, I don't ever remember it being that hot.
Yeah, no, it's been an ideal growing season despite the heat. And the reason for that is our maritime influence. Frequently, we'll get a hot spell or a heat dome in the fall where we have an offshore flow from a high pressure system that, might be sitting off of over in the Great Basin. And Southern California ends up with the east winds, the Santa Ana winds. Well, then our vineyards near the coast can get quite warm. But this year we had so much maritime influence that it could be 65 degrees in Castroville, and it was 112 in King City, which is only like 49 miles between the two. So our vineyards in the Highlands, were comfortable. I'll just say that they were warm, but they were comfortable, and it wasn't a problem. And for us, our vineyard we don't have the ideal row direction because it's left over from when the vines were planted in 1972, because we have some own-rooted vines. So on those vines right now, we're putting on shade cloth on the afternoon sun side, because that side of the vine is getting more heat and sunlight than we'd like to, especially as the sun angle gets lower in the sky as we get into fall. And also that shade cloth is just an 18-inch panel on one side of the vine. The other side of the vine is bird netting. But that panel can protect big time against a high pressure system in the Great Basin that would cause heat, such as in 2017 rather, where we saw 117 degrees in our vineyard for 2 days, Labor Day of that year. So it's a precautionary thing, and like a climate change element. And you're seeing a lot more of that in grape growing areas, particularly in the Napa Valley this year. So that's one thing that we're doing at the moment.
Well, good. Thank you. The next thing I want to do is really get into what is happening behind the scenes right now. Adam Franchione is going to give us a look as a grower who's selling fruit to all kinds of different folks. He's going to tell us what is actually happening. Adam, what kind of things are you doing on a day-to-day basis as you're waiting for the pick?
Well, right now we do farm other stuff. So we harvested some avocados the other day. So in our spare time, we're getting those picked off the tree right now, by California avocados. But right now is really the calm before the storm, I'd say. So we're doing stuff like Steve mentioned, bird netting. And as Gary Pizzoni famously said, if you eat my birds, I'll eat you. But right now, as you drive through the ranches, you see sometimes these birds that flock out, and they only come out when everything's verasioned. Before verasion, there's too much acid and they're too hard, and the birds don't like them. So when that sugar starts to accumulate in the cluster, they come out. So on some ranches, we'll net the whole thing if it's in the southern part of the Appalachian and you're very high up in the hills. Stuff in the north, we actually just net along the road where the power lines are, because the birds like to sit and chill up there on the power lines. So we're doing stuff like that. Like Adam mentioned, we're doing color thinning and trying to have as much uniformity as we can in our vineyards. But one of the things we just started last week, actually, which is a really exciting time, also the bane of our existence, because we have to do 57 of these samples throughout the week, throughout the harvesting. And it's quite a bit of time. It's about 6 to 8 hours to actually go through this process. And we are going through and we sample each block, and we measure for sugar. So it doesn't matter if that block is going to produce 120 cases of wine or that block's going to produce 1,000 cases of wine. We go through and we test it. So what we do is we walk through the entire section. I don't know how well you can see it, but we pick into these little quarter bins or buckets, and we sample all the grapes. We crush them up, and then we use a refractometer, which basically you pour a sample of the juice onto the refractometer. And often, if there's any beer makers out there, you'll see like it's the same thing as a hydrometer. But this uses basically refracted light, and it measures how much sugar is in the solution. So right now, it's showing 20 bricks, and which is basically essentially 20 grams of sucrose in a 100 milliliter solution. And wineries use this number to basically give them a point of how they want to pick. So sometimes they want to go by bricks, sometimes by acid, sometimes purely just by taste. But that bricks number is really important because that at least gives them an idea of, okay, now I have to start thinking about that this block is going to pick. So I'd say right now at 20 bricks, we generally move about a brick and a half every week. And right now we have blocks that are anywhere from 16 bricks to 20 bricks, which is 2.5 weeks difference. So we're kind of projecting the 9th of September, somewhere in the middle of September for our Pinot Noir, and October 1st for the Chardonnay. So typically Chardonnay comes 2 weeks, 3 weeks after our Pinot Noir. So it's the calm before the storm. And then after that, our significant others are what we call harvest widows. So
Adam, do you have a sense of what vineyard will be the first?
Which Adam?
Adam Lee. I mean, Adam Francioni, sorry. Out of the vineyards that you're checking, do you think you know which one's gonna be the one to have a first?
Right now, typically we say we harvest south to north. But just because of the spring we had earlier this year, the north has actually been ahead of the south. So I think we'll harvest like Gary's or Sobranis Vineyard or Rosella's Vineyard will be some of the first ones to come off. And then Sierra Mara later will catch up, and it'll be a longer harvest period, but it will come quick as well. So.
Sounds like you're busy. Thank you. Okay, let's now talk to the winemaker over here. Adam Lee, you're driving all over the place for, gosh, you have been for a few weeks now. Tell us what's happening in your world and what you're seeing out there.
Sure. So some of it is my end of the process that Adam was talking about, getting things prepped, making sure you have your picking bins clean so that when Adam happens to be up with a truck, or if there's just a truck available, maybe a backhaul, maybe they brought something else out here, we have the bins ready so that we can load them on the truck and turn around and take them down there. You don't want to be caught surprised, empty-handed, and not have bins ready when that opportunity presents itself. So there's doing that. There is preparing everything to go down and take samples. You have your buckets ready that Adam showed. You make sure you have the refractometer. We got down there this morning and I didn't have a Sharpie to mark the the different buckets with. A minor thing, you find something else in some other way. You stick a piece of paper in the bucket on top of it and hope that the grape juice doesn't soak through it by the time you get to a place you can measure the sugars. But you make it work. But it's amazing. I've been doing this. This is my 31st harvest. And you think by now I would have figured out to bring a Sharpie with me all the time. And somehow I managed to forget it this morning. So little things like that that you end up doing. The process, I think, is really fascinating because there's also this nervousness right now, excitement, but nervousness, and this attempt to guess. Like, I mean, Gwen, you were asking Adam which vineyard's going to come in first, most likely, and the sections he's talking about is right. But I know that, like, some of the numbers we got today for Rombauer, a couple of the vineyards didn't move much over the last week. But one vineyard, one that seems like it might not have been as far along, moved 2 bricks instead of 1.5 bricks. So it moved a bit faster than I think any of us anticipated, while the others moved a bit slower. That includes this new vineyard that the Franchionis and Pizzonis have called Windrock, which is a fascinating piece of property, very rocky soils, just to the north of Gary's. And usually with younger vines like that, there's not as much crop on them. Certainly the farmers are very careful to make sure that the vines aren't overly stressed, so you leave less fruit on there. And because this is very rocky soils, the vines can be a little more stressed just naturally. So on top of that, you want to even pay attention to the overall crop load because of that. And my gut going into this was that would come first, because with that small crop on there, the sugars accumulate faster. But given today's readings, that might not be the case. Well, that can all change in the next 3 weeks that Adam's talking about. And I could be right and wrong, 6, 8, 10 times between now and then. It's fun to speculate. It's fun to guess. We are sitting around, we're not twiddling our thumbs, but you spend a lot of time trying to figure out, well, if Windrock comes into Rombauer first, is there enough from there to fit into one truckload, or is there something else we can pick with it or can't pick with it, and how to coordinate that? And we really just simply don't know that. The other thing that Adam has to deal with that I think is fascinating is there are the decisions that winemakers make. So he has to deal with, Adam, I don't know how many different winemakers you deal with, but it's got to be enough to drive you crazy. I know you have 2 kids, but you got at least 20 kids as far as winemakers go that you have to.
I was gonna say, besides Adam saying y'all all the time, the other reason we know he's from Texas that we joke about is we use 1/4 gallon buckets to sample, and Adam uses 5-gallon buckets to sample in. And just always comments, everything's bigger in Texas. So he constantly reminds us of that.
That's it. Yes. But like, you've got some wineries that like to pick a bit more on the earlier side, while others like to pick on the later side. So it may not always be just which vineyard's ready, but which winemaker is ready for that particular fruit too.
Yeah, that's something we always keep in mind. In fact, I have like a spreadsheet of just like with notes from the wineries, because I email these 57 samples of bricks out to each and every winemaker. And along that, I just have notes. Some people want it at 23.5. Some people don't want to even see the numbers till it hits 24. So you definitely have this different perspective, and it's interesting. I've been on the vineyard side since 2012, and it's interesting to see in that 12-year span at what was ripe from the winemakers that were in here at the time to what they are now. And we work with certain wineries that are they're larger wineries, let's say, to some extent, but they have turnover in winemakers. And when they get younger winemakers, we tend to see the pendulum swing a little bit towards lower alcohols, earlier brick picking, kind of stuff. So it's interesting to see the evolution of the industry and kind of what our winemakers have been like.
Interesting. Let's check in with Steve. Steve, in addition to your own vineyard in the Santa Lucia Highlands, you and your teams are farming, what, 17,000 acres across California here. What does this particular moment, as you're leading up to harvest or even harvesting in some of these places, what does that look like for your crews? Steve, looks like we can't hear you. You got to unmute. Still can't hear you. There you go.
There we go. Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Okay. As both Adams indicated, what I like to call this period between, you know, veraison and harvest is hurry up and wait. You know, we're anticipating, we're nervous. We know it's going to be a lot of hard work, but it's really rewarding. You know, during the other parts of the growing season, we might have to be juggling pest control, irrigation, weed control, winemakers, all of those kind of things. At harvest, you know, it's pretty simple. Basically, we just got to meet everybody's expectations and get the crop in. And so, you know, we're checking everything like Adam and Adam have been talking about. And one of the things that's unique, well, first of all, we have our vineyard in the Highlands, and our Highlands fruit is all hand harvested and, you know, into half-ton bins or smaller, you know, refrigerated transport. I mean, we go all out like everybody else does to make, you know, fine wine or exceptional wine. You know, for the rest of our vineyards, we're basically shipping in 5 or 6 ton gondolas. So the key thing there is to tell the truck drivers to check inside those gondolas for mattresses, because frequently homeless people will be sleeping in one of those. It sounds funny, but it was true. We went to a winery one time and went to dump the grapes, and the grapes came out, and on top of it came a mattress, and we were so thankful, but whoever was sleeping in there wasn't in there at the time. But it happens. And so we kind of look at this as a military campaign, or as close as I'll ever get to the military, because we have a mission, we have resources, we have a number of people, we have machines, tractors, you know, lights, all of that good stuff. And it really comes down to getting an order from a winery and then trying to maximize your efficiency and keep all of your equipment going, because all this occurs at night, as best you can, to get all of the grapes that you're responsible for in to a winery and make them happy, you know, within a 60-day period. So it's a lot of pressure, but we're very focused and we don't have a lot of distractions. So it's kind of fun, actually.
You mentioned something that's really important, right? This is a lot of work, a lot of long hours, and you know, the focus on safety during harvest is something really important for everyone. I know we've got a lot of folks out there listening and tuning in here. It's a big priority. Let's take a quick second. If anybody has a question, drop it into the chat. If there's something we haven't covered so far about the harvest and a question you want to ask, feel free to chime in. The other check-in we wanted to give today is about the 2023 vintage. So one of the other things happening between May and today is a bottling. A lot of folks were bottling at the end of July, early August. And so that's something else that we wanted to check in with. Adam Francioni, let's check in with you on bottling. You, I think, bottled some of your raw wines recently.
Yeah, so we bottle our Pinots and our Viognier 11 months. We age them for 11 months in barrel. The Chardonnays we actually over vintage. That and the Syrah we over vintage. And yeah, bottling is always you know, I don't know how many of you have ever volunteered for bottling. I think it's maybe one of the most, like, people hear about bottling and they absolutely want to be a part of it, thinking maybe blending is a part of bottling. And then they get to bottling and they're like, no, I do not want to do bottling again. It's a very tedious job. It's a very stressful job on the winemaker. They have to be very organized. You know, often you hear horror stories about them putting into bottle, but labeling with the wrong label to have to undo that. So it's a very stressful time for the winemaker, constantly double checking. It's long hours. And so you kind of get this after bottling, you get this like reprieve before harvest. So that is a little bit nice, but the 23s are, we feel, absolutely stellar. 22s presented their own challenge in the sense that it was a warmer year, it was a low yield year. 23 was perfect growing conditions, really good yields, which is probably Adam likes to describe as more spices in the cabinet to kind of cook with. So we're really excited about the 23 vintage, and haven't tried too many because they do get that bottle shock right after going into bottle, after just imagine sitting on your couch for 11 months and then being moved, probably not going to be at your best at that time. But we're very excited to taste them in the early part of 2025. So.
Thank you. Adam Lee, there's a question in the chat I think you're going to answer for us from Kathy Chadwick. And then also you were talking to us about the 23 vintage. Love to hear from you on that as well.
Sure. So Kathy was asking about the size of the blocks, and I think that can vary by vineyard to vineyard as to how big each particular block, each particular section is. A lot of times it's set up by irrigation blocks, and where you can water, and then maybe you have different irrigation blocks with different clones. I don't know. I mean, I can answer, but like Steve, I know you've been involved in planting a number of new vineyards, including one for our friend Grant recently and all that. He was doing like 5-acre blocks. Was that right? Is that kind of normal? Steve, you'll have to unmute again. Sorry.
Yeah, thank you. They can be any size, and for Grant, we were doing 5-acre blocks, but they can go down to an acre or half an acre if you really want to get into the weeds, so to speak. Sure.
Yeah, to me as a winemaker, sometimes those smaller ones are really difficult because, particularly as a winemaker who makes his wine outside of the area, you've got to turn around and truck the grapes in, and then you have to have a fermenter of an appropriate size, small enough size to deal with. If you have a half-acre block, you might get 2 tons if you're lucky or something, and it becomes a question of economics a little bit, and just the challenges of doing that right.
Absolutely.
Yeah. For me, the 23 vintage is an absolute classic vintage, and I really mean that in all sorts of ways. In classic, almost Burgundian, and I hate to use that term, but the wines are more graceful, more elegant. 2023 was a longer, cooler growing season. I didn't start picking Pinot Noir until October. And October, the only other year that has been that late for me was 1999. So just to give you an idea, that doesn't happen very often to come along and have that late of a harvest. But the weather held out. It was a wonderful, long, lengthy hang time. So you got great balance, great elegance to them. It comes as close. This is a story that kind of seems off topic, but I had this job once in college working in a movie or in a auditorium theater, and it really was not the greatest job. It was an easy job. You let people in, you let them out, you let them back in again after intermission. But we had one guest speaker that insisted on meeting all of us ushers and wanted us to get questions ahead of time. And he had us put a little name tag on and say where we were from. And that guest speaker was Cary Grant. And so I got to meet Cary Grant, and I really did not know much about Cary Grant. I'd seen North by Northwest. He was climbing around on Mount Rushmore, getting shot at, and yet his shirt was perfectly white and not a wrinkle on it. And I'm like, oh, this is such crap, old movies, blah, blah, blah. And after I met him and the way he carried himself and introduced himself, and just the class and the elegance and the overall feel that he had, I was like, well, crap, maybe he could do that. Maybe he could climb on Mount Rushmore and fall all over the place and still hold himself together. That I've always aspired to make wines that have that sense of balance and class and elegance to them. And I think the 23 vintage really has that in the wines. They're not going to be the big over the top kind of wines that you got in 22, somewhat, but they are incredibly, incredibly well balanced. They're going to make long-lived wines and wonderful pairings with food, I think.
Thank you. Very much looking forward to trying some of these 2023s. Adam Lee, there's also another question in here from Bill Eggers. He's asking about the difference between the Santa Lucia Highlands and the Santa Rita Hills and the trend to do picking at lower bricks. And he's, I think, referencing back to some of your older Siduri wines.
Yeah, so Santa Rita right now, and actually I'm down there this weekend. The Santa Rita tends to have, because it is the true east-west valley, Santa Lucia is northwest to southeast. The Santa Rita Hills gets wind all throughout the day, while Santa Lucia gets it in the afternoon and really slows down the ripening process. I think the grapes in Santa Rita tend to be, the berries themselves tend to be smaller and thicker skinned. And so in Santa Lucia, a lot of times we have to wait a bit longer to pick because our acids are very high. In Santa Rita, because of those small berries and thick skins, you have to wait to pick for the tannins to come into balance, because you get a smaller amount of juice and really high skin to juice ratio. I do think there is a trend to picking at somewhat more lower bricks levels now. I really don't believe it's a trend as much as I believe it is a response to the fact that the vines have gotten older. And now in both these areas, Santa Lucia and Santa Rita, over the last 15, 20 years, there has been a real emphasis on Pinot Noir, on new plantings, and maybe over 25 years. And so as these vines are getting older, the roots are getting deeper, they are able to deal with drought somewhat better. You're finding that you're getting ripe flavors at somewhat lower bricks levels, something we didn't see when they were very young. And I think, I mean, you could call it a trend, but I really do believe in many, many cases it's a logical and appropriate response to vine age.
Interesting. Thank you. Steve, I wonder if you would touch on a question here from Mark Hill, who is talking about, the sort of balance here of chasing sugar, but also chasing ripeness. And, we talk a lot about what we have as such a unique perspective on this in the Santa Lucia Highlands, as the fact that it really isn't hard to have both each year. Maybe you can speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, sure, certainly. The wind is a big component of helping us achieve the physiological ripeness, if you would, and limit the amount of sugar accumulation that's going on. When we get to a certain velocity of wind, the vines tend to reduce their photosynthetic output. And when they do that, the carbon that's created in photosynthesis is partitioned differently than it would otherwise be. And as an example, with full photosynthetic, there's more carbon going into sugar accumulation. When you start to limit that, the vine partitions more of the carbon into all the other things that we're really looking for, the aroma precursors, the structural molecules like flavonoids and tannins and anthocyanins. So the wind is what I like to call terroir, is everything we can't change and wouldn't want to really, although it's tough some afternoons. It was particularly bad this afternoon. You couldn't really hold a conversation outside of your truck for very long without feeling the effects. So, yep.
That wind. So any last comments from our panel here in terms of what you expect over the next couple of weeks? I think, Adam Francioni, you think September 9th. I've definitely seen things change. I know Scott Caraccioli, who picked last week, had originally expected it to be a week or two later. It just kind of looks like it depends on the weather. Maybe one of you can comment on the forecast for the next couple of weeks and how things look, and give us kind of your last prediction and wrap up here.
Well, it's cool. I mean, what constitutes harvest is kind of in the eye of the beholder. If I'm getting up at 9 p.m., even if it's just one night, that's the start of harvest to me. But some people are like, no, you got to be like in the middle of it. But no, just really looking forward to it. I say we started bud break on the 11th of March. And over this past 6 months, it's you know, a lot happens, but this next month is really like what's key. And so much can happen here. You know, during the growing season, the berries are filled with acid or they're flowering. You know, a lot can happen during flower and set, but post that, they're pretty durable. But now when they get soft, the skin soften, a lot can happen. They're more susceptible to sunburn, they're more susceptible to heat. So it's a really fun time. So we'll just kind of see how it goes. I'm curious what the yields will be, because like Adam mentioned earlier, we did have less of a cluster count, marginally, but still. And I feel like the fruit has definitely gotten heavier, but I still notice the actual berry size structure is a little bit smaller than on what we normally tend to see. So
Some
you
peas
know,
and pumpkins, Adam. I mean, sorry,
yeah,
hens and chicks, whatever
hens
you
and
would get.
chicks. Yeah. What did you call them? Pumpkins and what?
Peas and pumpkins is
Peas
the
and
other
pumpkin. I
thing I
like
heard,
that
but
one.
yeah,
That's a
that's in
Texas thing, right?
It is a Texas thing, exactly. In Texas, all our berries are really big, but yeah.
Yeah, so I'm you know, it'll probably be on average, but I am curious to see what it'll be. So
Adam Lee, how about you? Any last predictions?
Sure. September 16th, because it's a full moon, and Adam's dad, Gary, believes in those kinds of things. And at this moment, I don't know any better than to guess that, and that's as good a reason as you can come up with.
that's like going $1 over on the Price is Right.
Yeah, it is. It is exactly. I think that we've got a couple of warmer days coming up for us on Sunday, Monday, maybe a little bit on Tuesday. But then the forecast, which is almost a week out, but it's getting closer, seems like it's cooling down a good bit after that. So it's not scheduled to be, I mean, a serious knock on wood on this. It's not scheduled to be this long heat spike, 7 days or so that we had in 2022, and we've had other years. It looks like a very short burst of some heat, not even that hot, which will maybe move things along a little bit. But then if you can settle into this somewhat mild pattern, it could be absolutely fantastic.
Exciting. How about you, Steve? Any last comments or predictions or wishes for this harvest?
Oh, plenty of wishes, but I'll just say that, I don't put any stock in the weather that's more than 3 days out, because you have to get 3 supercomputers to agree, and that's pretty tough. So it's a coin flip for me that's more than 3 days out. I will say, though, that I believe that it never fails on a full moon. We are busier than all heck. And it just never fails. And I've been doing this 42 years, so there may be something to it. The other thing that's interesting is when there's a hurricane, when the hurricane season in the Atlantic and the Caribbean is at full tilt, it tends to, those low pressures are so powerful, they really do keep storms from coming into California. So not that I'd want a hurricane, in the Caribbean to cause any damage, but it is a good omen for harvest here in California. So I'm optimistic. It could be a fantastic year, and we'll just take it 3 days at a time.
Well, thank you all. We certainly wish everybody a very happy and safe harvest. I'm going to go through a couple of upcoming things here. Feel free to keep throwing some questions into the chat. We have an exciting fall happening in wine country all through the Santa Lucia Highlands, up in Monterey County. Just a couple of reminders I wanted to make sure you knew. The Monterey Winemaker celebration is this Saturday in Carmel by the Sea. Always a great event. You can find more there at montereywines.org. Tickets are still available there, and they will be selling at the 7th and Dolores Gate on Saturday as well. McIntyre Vineyards, wonderful to have Steve here. Steve will also be at their beautiful property, at their very beautiful hospitality area, right in the middle of the vineyard, on September 8th, Sunday, September 8th. They're having a wonderful gathering there. So feel free to come down and really get a taste of harvest. I think he's going to be sharing some exciting stuff, and it'll make you feel like you're kind of there in it. Additionally, we have a really cool event. The Chowder Cook-Off is happening at Crew Winery, September 21st. You can find more at crewwinery.com. And then the Santa Lucia Highlands, a whole bunch of us, 10 of us, 10 of our wineries, Bernardus, Crew, Three Furies, Rombauer, McIntyre, Talbot, J. Lore, Hahn, Landmark, Sarah's Vineyard. I think Wrath signed up today. We're going to have a whole pavilion at Del Mar Food and Wine down in San Diego. Their grand tasting on Sunday or Saturday and Sunday, October 5th and 6th. Make sure if you're down there that you come and visit. And then, of course, Meet the Makers. This is always a great one, too. The Art and Wine Walk with local artists and the local wineries, all of our Carmel by the Sea tasting rooms that are open. That is October 12th. There's more online. There is always new events being added as well to our website, the SantaLuciaHighlands.com. This session was recorded. We will make sure to follow up. And I just want to, again, thank you all for attending. To all of our winemakers, all of our growers, all of our people in the trade out there, happy and safe harvest to you. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you, Gwen. Thank you,
Thanks, everybody.
everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.